All right, well, morning again. Good morning again. Hello, 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 hello. Hey, welcome back. I didn't introduce myself, by the way. My name is James. If we haven't met yet, it's a real joy to have you here. I want to extend my welcome to you as well. It's good to have you here at Grace City. And it's my privilege to be able to carry on our preach series, our summer preach series, looking at the book of Proverbs. Hugh kicked us off last week, looking just in general terms, kind of at what wise living looks like. And he asked us the question, is doing the right thing and being happy mutually exclusive, or are they connected? And he sort of concluded by saying that actually acknowledging God's way, doing the right thing, and being happy, being joyful, is actually connected. Acknowledging God's way brings us the greatest sense of joy. But the book of Proverbs, it's quite a challenging book to navigate. And so as we come to the series, I was a little bit kind of nervous. Like there's a lot in there that's difficult to kind of navigate. What does God mean when he's saying these things? But my courage was sort of swelled this week as I read a post on social media from a friend of mine who said, Proverbs are like tweets from God to us, and it's worth scrolling through his news feed. So that kind of gave me a fresh way of looking at what the book of Proverbs is about. They're like, God's downloaded a whole bunch of 140 character or less bite-sized chunks of wisdom for us on a whole bunch of different topics: money, sex, power, justice, family, relationships. And what we're going to do today is we're going to scroll through God's newsfeed, and we're going to be looking for the hashtag friends or hashtag friendship that we pick up through this book as we go along. The challenge, though, with topical messages, and this is a topical message, we're looking at friendship, is that the Bible usually says so much on any given topic that it's impossible to squeeze it all into 30 minutes. So we're not going to look at every single aspect of friendship today, although we are going to look at like a dozen tweets or proverbs from God as we make our way through. So hopefully there'll be some wisdom that we can glean from these 140 character or less bite-sized chunks that God has left for us in his word. And because this is Australia, rather than calling this message friendship, I've decided to call it Proverbial Mateship. The summary in Proverbs of friendship is basically this: that you will not lead a wise life unless you are finding, forging, and keeping good friends. That's kind of the overwhelming message of Proverbs, that actually friendship is crucial to living a wise life. And so with that in mind, and borrowing from a few lines from Rudyard Kipling's poem, he's the guy who wrote The Jungle Book, a few lines from one of his poems says this: I keep 6 honest serving men, they taught me all I knew, their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. So that's how we're going to shape our message this morning. We're going to be looking at the what, when, why, who, how and where of friendship. We're just going to mix up the order a little bit like I just did then. So first of all, why? Why is friendship important to us? First tweet or proverb for the day is this. Proverbs 18:24 says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. What this proverb seems to be saying is that a friend can be better than a sibling. And that's like a pretty big statement to make in any context, but especially in the context that the book of Proverbs was actually written in, because that context was far more family orientated than ours. So to say that a friend can be better than a sibling was a big statement to make. But how? How can a friend be better than a sibling? Well, Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for times of adversity. How many people here know that when you hit adversity, when you hit crisis in your life, you can rely on your family to be there for you? How many people know that? Plenty of us. That is good. How many people also know that you don't necessarily like your family all the time, though? Yeah, I can see that as well. Sometimes families are like that. We know that they will be there for us in times of crisis, but we know also that we don't necessarily get along with them that well all the time. There's a promo on Channel 10 at the moment for Dave Hughes' new show called Hughesy, We Have a Problem. And in this promo that I've seen, I haven't seen the show yet, I don't think it started, but in this promo, he's speaking to this other comedian, a lady called Ursula Carlson, and he says to her, oh, you don't get along very well with your brother, do you? And she says, no, I don't. And he says, but he must have some redeeming qualities. And she kind of pauses, thinks, and says, oh, he'd be a really great organ donor at some point. Like that's... Like that's how some people think of their family, that they'll always be there for me, but I don't necessarily get along with them so well. But a friend, however, a friend loves at all times. There's a unique kind of necessity to friendship. But what's strange is that our society, our culture, doesn't elevate friendship to the kind of position that the scriptures seem to. Think of all the pop songs that have ever been written. They're almost all centered on romantic love, right? Or think of all the Hollywood productions ever made. They're almost all centered, or they hero romantic love. And, that's why occasional movies like Lord of the Rings or Stand By Me, or even the theatre production of Wicked, which centre around friendship, they grip our hearts in a unique way because it's not something that's usually celebrated in pop culture. But it's kind of understandable because we know that we need these other types of relationships. We know that if it wasn't for romantic love, you would never have been born. And if it wasn't for family love, you wouldn't have been raised. And if it wasn't for civil or neighbourly love, then none of us would be safe in society because we've got to kind of keep a lookout for each other, crime, all that kind of stuff. But friendship, in a busy culture like our own, friendship kind of takes a back seat. It isn't promoted as much as what the other loves or the other relationships are. But the overwhelming message of Proverbs is that you will not lead a wise life without friends. And actually, a fool perishes for either lack of friends or poorly chosen friends. Another proverb that many of you would be familiar with, Proverbs 27:17, says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." You'll never become the kind of person that you ought to be or that you can be without friendship. Friendship sharpens you in a way that no other relationship does. And that's why a friend can be better than a sibling. And that's why friendship is important. That was why. Now where do we find these friends, these good friends? Proverbs 20 verse 6 says, "Many will say they are loyal friends, but who can find one who is truly reliable?" This proverb seems to be saying, actually, true friends are pretty hard to come by. It's pretty hard to come by really good friends. They're a rare commodity. Proverbs 27:9 says, "Oil and perfume make a heart glad, so a man's counsel is sweet to his friend." That's an interesting choice of words, sweet. Another translation uses the word pleasantness, but literally it means sweet. This is what Tim Keller in his book, The Way of Wisdom, which is actually about the book of Proverbs. I was given this for Christmas, and it's sort of a devotional that works through Proverbs throughout the year. I'm enjoying making my way through it at the moment. He wrote this about friendship. He said, "Friendship is pleasantness that means literally sweetness. At the time of Proverbs, people could not create sweetness in food, only discover it. Friendship is like that. We can work at it, enhancing it. Yet friendship begins with discovery. We must find persons with common loves and with common visions." So where do we find good friends? Well, Scripture seems to say we discover them. We discover them, which leads us to ask, well, who? Then who makes a good friend? C.S. Lewis wrote a great book called The Four Loves, looking at the four different words used for love in the Scriptures. And in this chapter looking at friendship love, he says this. He says, "Friendship is born at the moment where one man says to another, 'What? You too? I thought I was the only one.'" Have you ever been talking to somebody and discovered something about them that you thought you were on your own in? Like there's a real sweetness in that moment when you discover I'm not on my own in this. Somebody else shares this as well. You think that's important too? Wow, you love that thing too? Or maybe you hate that thing too? You hate coriander too? Me too. You hate boiled potatoes? Me too. Or maybe it's stuff that you love. You love surfing? You love mountain biking? You love arts and crafts? Me too. You watched that Al Gore documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, and now you've bought an electric car, put solar panels on your roof and stopped eating meat? Me too. At night time, when nobody else is around, you watch repeats of The Bachelor and eat ice cream straight out of the tub? Me too. Like there's a real sweetness when we discover an affinity that we have in relationship with somebody. Friends are discovered in those me too moments. Many will say that they're loyal friends, but who can find one who's truly reliable? Perhaps that's also why we can only really have a handful of friends. I don't want this to be crude, but I think Jesus kind of modeled this for us. He seemed to be friendly with the crowds. He was very much devoted to the 12, but he gave intentional time to the three, Peter, James, and John. And John was called the disciple that Jesus loved. It's almost like there seems to be kind of tiers to even Jesus's friendships. True friends are hard to find. They're a rare commodity. So I might be telling you something that you already know. You might be saying, there's nothing new here for me. I get that friends are important, and I know that if I have some sort of affinity with people, then that's a really good foundation for friendship. But what? What do good friends actually look like? Well, here are 4 marks, I think, of true friends. 4 marks of a true friend. Firstly, they are constant and they are available. Secondly, they're careful and sensitive. Thirdly, they are candid and truth-telling. Fourthly, they counsel and they sharpen us. So firstly, they are constant and they are available. This also speaks to the when of friendship. When are friends important? Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times. But then, Proverbs 25:17 says, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and they will hate you. I think a friend loves at all times doesn't mean you need to be together all the time. I think it means that in all kinds of times, a friend loves. In good times, in bad times, in routine times, in all kinds of times, a friend loves. That doesn't mean you need to live in each other's pockets, but it does mean that you need to be available. You need to be available to your friends. I don't know if you've experienced this before. I had a couple of friendships in my earlier years where we did live in each other's pockets, and we kind of ended up burning the friendship out. But conversely, there's other friends who you don't need to see that often, but when you do get together, you just pick up where you left off. People got friends like that. A friend doesn't need to be with his friend all the time in order to develop a deep relationship. It's about spending all different seasons of life, all kinds of times together, that becomes a great basis for friendship. Friends are available, they're also constant. Here's a harsh reality for you. A lot of the people who know you or who want to know you because you're useful to them. And just to poke you a little bit further, a lot of the people that you know or that you want to know, you know because they're useful to you in some way. We might call these people friends, but the truth is that they're kind of more associates or companions, really, for us. Proverbs 19:6-7 says, many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is a friend of the one who gives gifts. However, the poor are shunned by all their relatives. How much more do their friends avoid them? Most of the people we know because they're useful to us. They're useful to us in some way. Maybe because they're useful to us when we want to have a good time, or they're useful to us when we need to have our kids carpooled to sports practice, or they're useful to us because they make our morning coffee, or they're useful to us when we want to meet other people. Or how many tradies identify this? People are friends with you because you're useful to them when they need help. How many people who own a ute feel that way? I feel like people are friends with me when they need something out of me. Most of the people that we're friends with, we're really just friends with because they're useful to us in some respect. The difference is between a friend and a companion, though, is that when you hit a crisis, a companion says to you, hey, it looks like you're in a crisis. Call me if you need anything. Right, but a friend says, I see you're in a crisis. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. I'm available to you. I'm constant in all the seasons of life. Friends are friends even when your chips are down and you've got nothing useful to offer them anymore. For a friend, you're not a means to an end. You're an end in and of yourself. You're valued and cherished for who you are. There's a difference between friends and companions. So true friends, they're constant, they're available. They're also careful and they're sensitive. Here are two of the more kind of humorous proverbs you'll hear today. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, "Only joking." Or Proverbs 27:14, if anyone loudly blesses their neighbor early in the morning, it will be taken as a curse. What are these Proverbs talking about? Why would you deceive somebody and then tell them, "I'm only joking"? Or why would you incur the wrath of somebody who's not a morning person? I think it's because you're probably emotionally disconnected with those people. You don't actually know them well enough to know what's going on in their life, what they love and what they don't love. Again, in this book, looking at this proverb, Keller says this. He says, these people, they don't know what the other person's inner topography well enough to know what hurts or helps, what inspires or bores, what stimulates or irritates. Here's another proverb in a similar vein. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on a wound. I've not had that, but that sounds painful. Is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. What's this saying? I think it's saying if I can be happy when you're sad, we're not really friends. And if you can be happy when I'm sad, we're also not really friends. Because friends voluntarily tie their hearts to one another. It's like they put their happiness into their friend's happiness. It's like they say, look, I can't emotionally flourish unless you're flourishing as well. You know, I can't be happy if you are floundering. And I think in pretty much every case, the best example of this is Jesus. It says in Hebrews 12, for the joy that was set before him, that was our joy, he endured the cross. Even though he was facing suffering, so emotionally tied to us as he, that he still endured the cross for our joy, because it was for our joy. Your friends can't be content when they see another friend in pain. Now, Heather and I experienced this personally not long ago. In the space of 6 hours, we received 2 really hard pieces of news for us to handle as a family. And as we processed them with some friends around us and let them in on what was happening, those friends, they cried with us, they grieved with us, they called out to God with us. They were so emotionally tied to where we were at that because we were suffering, they were hurting as well. But here's the thing, if you're a friend, that happens automatically. It's not that you choose not to sing songs to somebody whose heart is heavy. It's that you can't. You can't sing songs of joy to somebody who's going through a hard time because you're so emotionally tied to them that you're not able to do that when life is collapsing around them. True friends are constant and available. They're careful and sensitive. Thirdly, they are candid and truth-telling. Do you remember that scene in Shrek when Shrek and Donkey first meet each other, and Donkey is tagging along behind Shrek, feeling like he's found a new long-lost friend, and that didn't make sense. Anyway, and he's tagging along behind Shrek, and he's singing songs about friendship, and then Shrek turns around to Donkey and says, "Would you just shut up? No wonder you don't have any friends." Remember what Donkey says? Only a true friend would be that truly honest. Only a true friend would be that truly honest. True friends are candid and they're truth-telling. Proverbs 27:5-6 says, better is open rebuke than love that is concealed. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. I love Proverbs because their images, the metaphors in them are so vivid, but they're also really paradoxical as well. Like we read here about friendly wounds. Those things don't seem to come together. You know, faithful wounds and wounding kisses. Those things seem to be opposed, but the metaphor is still there. So what are friendly wounds? I think friendly wounds in the context of friendship are words that our friends need to hear, even though it might be painful for them to hear them. They're friends that are words that our friends need to hear, even though it might be painful for them to hear. And so my question for you is this. If you're afraid of saying what needs to be said to a friend, then are you really that good a friend? If you're afraid of saying what needs to be said to a friend, are you really that good a friend? You might think that your hesitation is because you don't want to cause them pain. But you know, actually, the reality is that if I don't say this thing, then they're going to keep making this mistake. They're going to keep going down this path of destruction. Actually, it is less loving for you to not say anything than it is for you to say something, even though it might cause them pain. You know, the truth is that actually this doesn't come particularly naturally to Australians. I read this article a couple of years ago now, which was talking about conflict and how different nations and cultures handle conflict. And this article said that of all Western nations, actually Australians are the most likely to avoid conflict. And in spite of our brash exterior, actually Australians are the most likely to not bring something up with somebody, even though they might need to hear it. So it doesn't actually come naturally to Australians. Let me give you a simple example of this. We were at Connect Group a couple of months ago, and we were having a meal together. And after the meal, one of the guys in our group, who's always super helpful, started packing up all the dishes and stacking my dishwasher. And I was in the kitchen with him, and I saw him put the bowls where the cups usually go, and then I saw him put the plates where the bowls usually go. And I was just biting my lip. And then I did what most of us would do in that situation, which is I said nothing. And I waited till he left the room, and I moved everything back to where it was meant to be. The problem was he came back into the kitchen and he sprung me and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just moving stuff around." He's like, "What is it with you Australians?" He's Brazilian, this guy. He's, "What is it with you Australians? Why don't you say if somebody's doing something wrong? Why don't you speak up? I don't get this about your culture. I don't understand it." Any Brazilians identify with that? A few of you? Yeah, great, yeah. I thought so. It doesn't come particularly naturally to many of us, especially if you've been raised in a culture that doesn't value that aspect of relationship. It's actually easier for us to say nothing at all. I remember, though, another time where I felt like there was something I needed to raise with a good friend of mine. And so I got over my fear, and I actually arranged a time to get together to chat to him about it, to raise the stuff that I felt he needed to hear. And we went for a kind of walk around part of Narrabeen Lake, and as we were walking, I opened my mouth to say, "Hey, person X, I won't say who it is, hey, I thought that it would be good for you to hear this." And as I opened my mouth, he said, "James, I'm so glad that you organised to get together, because I feel like there's some stuff I just need to bring up with you." I was like, oh. And then he proceeded to point out all these evidences of pride in my life. I was like, this is not how I anticipated this conversation going. But he started off by saying this. He said, "Hey, I love you too much not to tell you this. I love you too much not to tell you this. Only a true friend would be that truly honest." And in friendship, candor means I'm going to tell you the truth. But sensitivity means I'm going to tell you the truth. But because we're so emotionally tied together, this truth that might hurt you is actually going to cause me pain as well. And that's why actually, being a good friend, being a true friend can be hard and it can be painful. And that's why I think, although there might be lots of people who we might call friends, the reality is that you can't have this kind of depth of relationship with dozens and dozens of people. You can't open yourself up and let other people speak into your life that way with dozens and dozens of people. But my question to you is, do you have that kind of relationship with anyone? Do you have that kind of relationship with anyone? You can't have that kind of relationship with everyone, but do you have it with anyone? I think for some of us, actually, the hesitation is opening yourself up to anyone is really challenging. But my question is there somebody at least who you've got this kind of relationship with? I think for others of us, we've spread ourselves too thin. And actually, we've got lots of friends around us, but we're so spread thin that we've not invested in a relationship that has this kind of depth. Do you have this kind of relationship with anyone in your life? Truth-telling and sensitivity, they must go together. You can tell the truth and not really care about its impact, or you can be too careful, too sensitive, and not say what needs to be said. And both of those things are easier options. The more difficult thing is telling the truth even though it might hurt. Those two things must go together, truth and sensitivity. So true friends are constant and available. They're careful, they're sensitive, they're candid and truth-telling. They also counsel and sharpen. We looked at this proverb already. Oil and perfume make the heart glad, so a man's counsel or heartfelt advice is sweet to his friend. Or Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Now, friends provide counsel and they provide heartfelt advice to each other. They sharpen and they challenge each other along the way. Yes, they're vulnerable. Yes, they're emotionally sensitive, but they also provoke us and tell us, hey, there is another way to look at the world and there is another way to act than how you are acting. Friends provoke and challenge each other. As I was reflecting on this aspect of friendship this week, this thought popped into my head. Friends love you as you are, but they don't leave you where you are. Friends love you as you are, but they don't leave you where you are. They provoke you, they challenge you, they encourage you to change as well. And receiving counsel from a friend, it's unique. It's unique from other kind of relationships in your life. Because it's not like a counselor or a therapist who you go to. I know there's a few counselors in the room. Could you imagine if you sat down with a client, counselor, and you said to them, hey, why don't you tell me a little bit about your life? And they said, hey, how about you start? Like, it doesn't work that way. It's a one-way relationship. Or can you imagine if you're a supervisor in a workplace, imagine if you gave your subordinate some constructive feedback or some criticism, and then they turned around and gave you some constructive feedback and criticism, in spite of your humility. Like, that is a dangerous road to tread for a subordinate. Those relationships, there isn't a mutuality of counsel. There isn't a mutuality of criticism and feedback that exists within friendship. Sometimes that feedback is pleasant, like in verse 9, and sometimes it's painful, like in verse 17. And the truth is that you can have this aspect of relationship within other types of relationships. So you can have this kind of sharpening relationship within a family context or within a romantic relationship, and we should strive to have that aspect. But it's because we've incorporated friendship into those other types of relationships. And it's crucial because we're never going to become the people that we need to be or that we ought to be without some counsel and without some sharpening happening in our life. Hugh had a great summary statement last week for his message, which was acknowledging God's way brings the greatest sense of joy. So in terms of a summary for what do good friends look like, here's a statement for you, that a friend always lets you in, but they never let you down. A good friend, he will always let you in, but will never let you down. That's like a picture of an ideal friend, a picture of a perfect friend. A friend who is transparent, they're candid, they're vulnerable, they welcome counsel and sharpen. They always let you in, but they never let you down because they're constant and they're reliable, because they're careful and they're sensitive. The ideal friend, the perfect friend, a true friend will always let you in, but will never let you down. So you remember where we started with that, those few lines from Kipling's poem. He says this, I remember 6 honest men, I keep 6 honest serving men, they taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. The only one we haven't looked at yet is how. Now, how is it that we become the kind of friends that we ought to be? And how is it that we get the kind of friends that we need to have? How do we find the power? How do we find the motivation? How do we find the impetus to live like this? And when you read these proverbs, these tweets from God, you get a picture of what this ideal friend looks like. A friend who always lets you in and never lets you down. A friend who tells you the truth even though it might cause them pain in doing so. A friend who lets you in completely and walks in your shoes. A friend who's constant and reliable and sacrifices in order to be available to you. And when you get this picture of this ideal friend, 2 things happen, or at least happen for me. Firstly, you get this sense of longing. You get this sense of longing for that kind of relationship in your life. I think you get this kind of longing because we know we don't have all the friends that we need to have. We don't have the kind of friends that we need to have. And I feel like we get the sense of longing because we live in a world where friends are taken away from us faster than we can forge them sometimes. Don't know if you find that. In a highly mobile context like Sydney's Northern Beaches, it feels like good friends like Chewy and others are taken away from us faster than we're able to forge them. And partly that's because, Heather and I lament that some of our friends have moved out of this city or even out of this country. And that's been really hard to take. I think part of it is also because as life goes on and we get busier and busier, we have less and less time to invest in relationships that really count and the kind of friendships that we really need. So I feel like when you get this picture of this ideal friend, it stirs up a sense of longing in us. Like, oh, that's what I want. That's what I want. I need that. But secondly, I feel like we have this sense of longing, and we realize that part of the reason that we don't have all the friends that our heart longs for, and not just because they've moved out of town, and not just because we're busy. I think we don't have all the friends we ought to have because we're not the friends that we ought to be. We don't have all the friends we ought to have because we're not the friends that we ought to be. So how? How do we get the power, the motivation, the impetus to be the kind of friend that Proverbs says we ought to be to people around us? In John 15, when Jesus is on his way to the cross and he's opening up some amazing truths to his disciples, to his friends, about what relationship with him looks like. And he says things like, I'm the vine and you are the branches. And he says other things that are profound and we are still reveling in the good of looking into. He also says this about friendship: greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. He says, hey, I've let you in. You're not a servant anymore. You're friends. I've let you in. You know your master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything that I've learned from my Father, I've made known to you. Jesus let us in. He opened himself up. He laid down his life for us, and he took wounds on himself. They're the friendliest wounds, most faithful wounds that a friend could ever take. Jesus is the best friend that you'll ever know. He'll always let you in, but he'll never let you down. He'll always let you in, but never let you down. Jesus, though, he's not just a model to follow. He's not just a model to follow. Actually, being friends with Jesus changes us to the very core of who we are. Kind of like being friends with the biggest guy in school gives you confidence every day that you walk in the school gate. Like being friends with Jesus changes you. It changes your confidence level. Kind of like the way that having an amazing player on your team brings out the best in you as a player. It's not just that they play well, but you play better because they're there. Kind of like the way that being friends with a famous person gets you into places of privilege. See, being friends with Jesus, it's not just a model to emulate. Being friends with Jesus changes us to the very core of who we are. Jesus loves us with the kind of love, this unconditional love, this agape love that creates value in the objects of its affection. Like, he's changed us because of the way he loves us. And actually, it's experiencing his love that gives us confidence to go out and to do love likewise. And it's being on his team that brings out the best in us. And it's relishing his favor and in his blessing that instills in us the confidence and the willingness and teaches us how we ought to be those kinds of friends as well. A Christian is a friend of Jesus. Jess led us in that moment of free worship. She was saying, you are all that our heart longs for. And ultimately, he's the only one that will ever satisfy, like Adrian brought to us. He is the full stop on any relationship and we can have in this life. And very simply, a Christian is a friend of Jesus. And there might be people here today and you don't know whether you're a friend of Jesus. Or maybe you know that at the moment you're not a friend of Jesus. But you're here because you're kind of looking in, kind of checking in on who this Jesus is, what he's like. And you're asking questions. Is he everything that he says he is? And will he love me the kind of way that other people say that he's going to love me? My encouragement to you, if you're not friends with Jesus here this morning, is to say, make Jesus the friend that your heart desires, and you will have all the friends that you ever need.